morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what we've decided to talk about tonight. So tonight we'll be talking mostly about our hospice experience. Our hospice experience, and I have a hard time with hospice. And my guests are Rick East and Caroline East, and they've got some interesting stuff to talk about with this hospice experience, and you will see as we go into the show. As you know, the show goes to two major segments. The first segment is a bio segment where we'll talk about who they are and where they're coming from so that you'll know why it is they have views on things like hospice and that sort of a thing. And then the second half of the show we'll go into the topic, the hospice experience. And not just hospice, but the personal experience of these two guests of mine. Rick is a delightful human being in many ways. He's also a producer in training, and he's pretty far along. It's quite an ordeal to go through this whole experience of education and certification. And his wife, I've just learned a little while ago that she is also a hypnotist. And if I go fading out, you know she's taking advantage of me. So how are you guys feeling this evening?
I'll behave.
Good.
Very well, thank you.
Good? You're not nervous?
Nope.
That's terrible. I'm always nervous.
You're so charming. Just put me at ease.
So, all right, we will talk about with who are you? If I were to ask your best friend, who should I attack first? Talk to first.
Attack this guy.
If I were to ask your best friend, Rick, who is Rick? What would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Rick is what?
My best friend. What my best friend would say about me.
Yeah.
I think loyal and fun to be with, and I guess that's the main thing. Honest, and most of the time honest. Sometimes, of course, Caroline says when my lips are moving, I'm probably lying. So maybe the honest thing isn't so.
Sure.
Isn't so real, yeah.
So when and where were you born?
Sacramento, California.
You're a California boy?
Yes.
Why were you born?
Why was I born? You know, you've asked me that a couple times.
And you come up with the same answer every time.
Same dumb answer every time.
You give the question right back.
I've thought about it a little bit more.
Have you now?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And I think that I was born to, in some small way anyway, try and help and improve humanity.
Are you having any luck?
Well, that's a really tough job.
Good question.
Yeah, but starting small.
Would you go to Washington, D.C. and help those guys out if you were looking at that?
That's the big leagues. Yeah.
So that's a wonderful idea of why you were born. Yeah. And anything significant about your racial, national, or cultural heritage that's worth reporting to the viewers?
English and Swedish, so as you call it, white bread.
Yes, that's it.
Yep, yeah.
A religious preference. If I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer.
That's okay. I was raised Presbyterian, full of Presbyterian ministers in my background, and I married a Jewish girl, and 30 years later I actually converted to Judaism. So right now I would say that I identify Jewish.
Yeah, well, your memory's pretty good. You remember the stuff you told me before, so you're not catching you in a lie, huh?
Well, I wrote everything down, and then I reviewed it. Yeah.
How about you?
Because you remember my lips were moving.
How about your formal education? You talked about that before. We have some new viewers, so we want to hear you say it again.
Okay, so college, I studied economics at the University of California. Graduated from UC Berkeley in '77 with an econ degree, and then during the course of my professional career in electronics, I went back to school and got an MBA from San Jose State University.
Oh, you're loaded for bear, huh?
Yeah, I guess.
Other education that's worth commenting about?
The educational life. I mean, there's an awful lot going on out there and just experience. So formal education, I've done some certification programs from my past profession, and then I'm going through this certification and training to be a producer and a crew member of
And you're doing
video
fine.
production. It's fun. I enjoy it. This is by choice, and I enjoy it. And I'm learning a lot, and I have good mentors in all aspects here on the show with you, the crew members, and the management of the Tualatin Valley Community TV studio. Everybody's been so helpful. So it's been a joy.
How much you need for that testimony?
$50 ought to do it. Yeah. I like cash.
You have a formal job anymore?
No, I'm retired, and so I don't have a formal job.
Mm-hmm. And you have a partner, a wife or a husband? Never mind, we don't do that one.
I'd like to know if there's anyone else. I thought it was
That's your partner? Yeah. How many years?
Wow, I've known you for almost 41.
41, yeah.
Yes, and we got
Come on.
married in 80, so we're getting close to 40 years, but 39.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah.
So let's go to you now for a moment. And your full name is?
Caroline Sarah East.
How did you get that name?
Caroline Sarah?
Yeah.
That's funny you should ask. My parents actually, my father is an immigrant, and he wanted to name me for his mother. In Jewish tradition, we name for those who have passed
Yes.
to keep their memory alive. And Caroline was really a translated version of my grandmother's name, which was Sirla. She was Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And so we then named, because she was gone when I was born, my father named me Caroline for his mother and Sarah, or Sarah, for his grandmother who ended up raising him, because his parents passed by the time he was 9 years old. He was an orphan. And so his grandmother raised him, and her name was Sarah Rivka in Hebrew. So they named me Caroline Sarah. Or
If
Sarah.
I were a rich man.
It's my favorite show.
The East part came from me.
Yes. He
Oh, yeah.
donated.
I donated.
My,
yeah.
my maiden name was Linsky. That's my father's name. Yes.
And we know about your religious preference because of this guy's religious preference.
Yes.
And your formal education.
I have a bachelor's degree in social welfare and corrections. Was a double major. And so I was always very interested in the social sciences. And I did my internship in college in the California State Correctional System. And did some parole work and worked in the state prisons, and actually lived in the state prison for a while, which was very interesting. I could tell you a few stories, and now you know why I'm a hypnotist.
And I heard earlier before the camera started rolling that you had some surgery and you hypnotized yourself and you didn't need any anesthetic.
That's correct.
Wow.
Yes. It was a relatively small surgery, but there was a scalpel involved, and you know, it was a real surgery. I had my port removed, the port that had been used for my chemo infusions when I was getting cancer treatment. And I left the port in for 5 years after I finished my chemotherapy, and finally decided to have it removed. By that time, I was a hypnotist and decided that I was going to do this without anesthesia because I could hypnotize myself.
Where are the scars? Did they go in from your leg or your?
No, actually, it's a scar right up here. It was
Can
attached.
I see them?
Can you see?
No. No. You almost tried to smack me.
Yeah.
Don't hit me.
Very gullible. It was attached to the jugular vein, so it was up here. Yeah. So she opened, the original scar from when it was put in, and went in and had to find all the old stitches and snip them, and then find the line that went from the actual port up to the jugular vein, and then free all the stitches and pull it out, and then sew me back up. So
I have epic
it was
film
about 22
footage
minutes.
of all of it.
What a detailed memory, huh?
Yeah, well,
she
that
was,
was
no, she's asleep. she didn't know what happened. She had to see my movie to know what
You're going to get your 2 cents in anyhow, right?
I was in La La Land. I
Yeah.
had a good time.
And you're still working?
Part-time now, because I'm mostly taking care of my dad.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Okay. And we know you have one daughter.
We have 2, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
Yes. The daughter that you met
Yes.
has her master's in social work, and she's a drug and alcohol counselor for an organization here in Oregon. And she's the younger of the 2 daughters, and then our older daughter is also lives in the area, and she works out on the Intel campus.
Well, you guys are really in a high cotton there, okay? And your political persuasion, do you make a comment about that because of what's going on now in the country and around the world? And don't get me on my soapbox.
Okay, I won't.
Yeah.
But in terms, I don't affiliate with a party, but I probably won't vote for the incumbent.
Why don't
in
you
the
affiliate with a
2020
party?
What's that?
Why don't you affiliate with a party?
Because I don't line up close enough with either one. I try and go with the candidate. The candidate's positions and who I trust, and so I'll vote that. I consider myself the way George Washington wanted things: no political parties and vote on each issue and as they come. But that was unrealistic. And I've registered with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the past, and decided about 20 years ago that I'll just go independent and vote for whomever I want.
During the same election?
During the same election.
You voted for both parties in the same, never mind.
Oh yeah. If it's a mixture of candidates, I may vote for some Democratic candidates and some Republican candidates. But right now it's kind of hard to vote for Republican candidates for me, lining up the way they do with the incumbents. But
I'm gonna
2020
get him cornered,
is
got him squeezed, you know.
2020 is coming. Yeah.
2020 is coming.
Yeah.
All right. The difference between sympathy and empathy. What is the difference between those two?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so I always confuse the two, but one of them is walking side by side, and one of them is actually experiencing experiencing exactly what the individual feels, and I always mix those up.
Well, sympathy, I think you're on the right track. I think sympathy, just about, unless you're either a sociopath or a psychopath, most people experience sympathy. We can relate when someone is going through a hard time or a good time and be happy for them or be sad for them. That, to me, is sympathy. Empathy is when you actually can feel the feelings and put yourself in that person's place, or maybe you've been there yourself, and you truly have an intrinsic understanding of what they're experiencing. That's
pretty, I like that, yeah.
You like that?
She's a pro.
I'm a social worker. I'm a social worker.
Any memberships in political, social, or civic organizations worth mentioning? You had so much going on in your life with your education and your work. I wonder if you have any leftovers from organizations you belong to. Like I belong to the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center,
Oh, yeah.
and a bunch of others. I can't go on forever and ever. I'm a joiner. I left the liberal political, falling off the edge.
I used to be very involved with, and it's only because time and not having an animal now that would qualify for this kind of work, but I used to be very involved with animal-assisted therapy and activities, and which is a wonderful, wonderful volunteer opportunity where you train an animal to, in my case, it was one of our dogs, and you train them obviously in obedience and to be well-mannered so that they can go into all kinds of facilities. We went into hospitals and care homes and schools and worked with children, and they just, because they don't judge and they're loving unconditionally, they put people at ease. In fact, we went into a hospice facility once and sat with some folks who were at an end-of-life stage, and you know, sometimes you just want to pet something or have a dog there or a cat. I mean, all kinds of, there are llamas that do this kind of work. Any animal can do it. But in my case, it was at one of our dogs. And it just puts people at ease. It lowers blood pressure. You know, they say that there have been studies done that people who have had heart attacks tend to live a year or so longer when there are animals in their life.
Studies. Good studies.
Yeah, good studies. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's important work, and I have seen so much doing that kind of work. We went into the 911 facility at one time and had a really moving experience with someone who had just taken a horrific call, really horrific call. And I was there with my dog standing off to the side, and when they finished the call and the first responders had arrived on the scene, they were able to get off the phone. And this gentleman, who generally didn't care for the smaller dogs, and my dog was a smaller dog, looked at me and said, "Can I hold Lily?" That was my dog's name. And I said, "Of course." And he took her in his lap, and he literally just folded himself over her and just hung on to her for dear life. It's just and to see someone so strong, you know, who's just on the phone with someone in this tragic situation moments before, kind of letting down and just hanging on to this dog for emotional support. It moved me. I'll never forget that.
Would that be characterized as spiritual experience? Or,
Yes,
yeah.
for me it was. Yes.
You sure you're not a singer? You're so full of feeling. You're so rich.
Well, I love music. I don't think God quite granted me the right voice for that. I could sing for you, but you'd ask me
Yeah, we
not
can
to.
scare a lot of animals away from our house when we get to sing.
I do love music.
All right, one more question or two. Any persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admire or look up to? Any names come to mind? For as fellow human beings that you
there are.
admire.
Wow, there's so many to choose from. And I think the last time we spoke, I told you Eleanor Roosevelt, so I don't want to use the same answer again. There are so many people out there I admire.
As well.
Yeah, I do admire her. You know, and I'm not just saying this because we're talking about hospice today and my father is involved, but I do really admire both my dad and my mom, the parents that I had that encouraged me to live my best life, that showed me, you know, what ethics are, that raised me with principles and caring and kindness. I have to give them credit where credit is due. I admit I've led a very, very blessed life. And I really look up to my dad for the man that he is. My mom's been gone 11 years, but my dad, his character is so strong, it's impossible not to admire him. He's kind and funny and empathetic and courageous and always encouraged me to be whatever I wanted to be. He always was lifting.
Through the years, he was that way towards
Always.
you.
Oh, my biggest supporter. Always.
You have brothers and sisters.
One older brother.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in North Carolina
Is
now.
he as nice as you are?
Yes, he's very big-hearted.
That's what she says
My
on
big
screen.
brother. That's what I say on screen. He used to call me dumbhead when we were growing up.
Dumbhead while he's wearing one of those Davy Crockett hats.
Yeah.
How about
He's a
anybody
character.
that comes to mind for you that you admire or look up to? Any?
Well, I'm going to tell you someone different this time.
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln's still my number one guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I refer to studies of Lincoln on many things. But there's in my past 2 years since I've been retired and studying more about spiritual and dimensions and chakras and such. There's a writer, and his name is Dan Millman, and he has written several books. Some of my a mentor of mine, very close friend of mine, she referred him to me, and I read one of the shorter books. It's a paradox type of story, and I really related with this guy. Number one, he's a Cal Bear.
Got that going.
Yeah, and so it's just a given there. But he writes about this in a way that I could relate to, and it was a good transition from workaday world where you're just pounding it out and not stopping too much to take a breath, to when you get done with that, there's got to be more, and learning about things broader than the universe than just pounding it out every day to make a living. So I relate very well with this writer, Dan Millman, who has written many books. He has one of the characters is, or the series is around what he calls a peaceful warrior, and very fascinating novels and stories, and very full of very inspiring information. So he's a guy that I've found I've been rereading books by him, and I reread the stuff on Lincoln, and when I go, wait a minute, you're rereading Dan Millman and you're trying to use what he's writing and what he's saying in practice, you know, as I learn. So that's a new one. And then this one's going to be a little bit different, but Yogi Berra. And Yogi Berra, because you hit it hard and soft, and like if you come to a fork in the road, take it. and when I got to that retirement decision, I took it. Right. So a lot of these Yogi Berraisms, you know, just kind of witty and quick, and plus he has 10 World Series rings. I mean, so yeah, he's a little different than Dan Millman and Abraham Lincoln on that, but still, some of those funny sayings do have a point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of humor?
No.
He's too quick for me.
That's why I married him.
You betcha.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, what a pair you two are.
thank you.
So let's take a break.
Pair of what?
What a pair you two are.
A pair of what?
I'm not sure. So let's take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about hospice and your experience. And I'm looking forward. All right, we're back, and thanks for staying tuned. And for your viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1 hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about tonight. And I always smile because I always blow that line. I've been doing it for 20 years, you know. And my guests this evening are, of course, Rick and Caroline East. And I'm looking forward to what you'll be talking about, your experience with hospice. What is hospice? Want to do a general comment, just a few words before we go into the questions?
Yeah, basically it's care towards the last 6 months of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's keeping a patient comfortable. It works with not only the physical but the spiritual aspects of it, and it also attends to family and close friends. It's not just the patient, but it's meant to be an easing, I would say, for
comfort care only.
Comfort care, yes.
They don't use any measures that extend life.
Right.
It's just for comfort care in the last months or days.
And based on your recent experience, particularly, you have a better appreciation for what it means to be a caretaker or someone in the transitioning role with the person who's in hospice. Yeah. So, yeah. What has led you to your interest in hospice? Why?
Well, I did visit hospice once with my therapy dog, and it was a reality check that at some point everyone gets to this place where, and that was a long time ago. And then, as a social worker, you become acutely aware of making sure that people are comfortable and cared for and all of that. Years later, I'm now in that stage with my own parent, my father. And that came very unexpectedly last October.
And oftentimes those things do come unexpectedly, huh?
Yes. Yeah, that was the last word I ever expected to hear. We were in a quarterly meeting with the supervisor and the nurse at the facility where he lives. He lives in an assisted living in Hillsboro, and
That's Hillsboro in Oregon.
Hillsboro, Oregon.
Yes.
And they brought up that he had taken ill recently, and they had mentioned that it might be time to think about putting him into hospice.
So you started your research.
Well, we were just shocked.
I broke down in tears.
Yeah, we both just looked at each other and
What
thought,
are you saying?
Yeah, what are you saying? Because to us, hospice meant he's on death's door imminently. And so that was the first shock.
I believe that there is still, to many who are not current with, how things have changed, that thought that when someone mentions hospice, you're within days or weeks of death. And that was my belief.
Yeah.
And the few friends I've had that went into hospice literally did die within several weeks of going in. And I thought they were trying to tell me something that I didn't know.
Do most people who go into hospice pass away? Or how many of them come out of hospice and go back to regular life?
Well, that's a great question, because actually hospice care is given when other types of care cannot be given. For instance, my father is the parent that is going through the hospice care now, is not a candidate for any kind of surgery. And he was experiencing some extreme stomach pain. And the doctor thought that there might be a tumor in his stomach, that he might have cancer. But we couldn't do any testing, because any of the testing that they would have had to do would have been too invasive. And my dad, who has dementia, could not withstand going through any procedure that requires anesthesia.
How old is he now, your dad?
He's 99.
Oh my God.
He'll be 100 in a few months. So, bless his heart, I know. And he's still so full of spunk, and he's high-spirited, and he has dementia. So, he doesn't necessarily know who I am, and he's very confused. But he has such a strong will to live, and so when I heard hospice, it was devastating to me. I mean, it destroyed me, and I couldn't think. I froze, And my brother, I keep him, of course, updated on everything that's going on with my dad, had the exact same reaction. Because that's what we're used to, is this, I think it's kind of an older version of what hospice used to be, that you just kind of went there at the very end for comfort. But it's not that way anymore. And the way the people in hospice described it to us was really just a way of making a decision at some point, generally within the last 6 months of life. And my doctor was thinking that Dad was at that point. And so he felt it was appropriate, to go ahead with that next step. Keeping them comfortable, giving them a good, high quality of life, as high quality as they can have,
Sure.
but not extending life-altering measures.
Yes, yes.
So what that means is, and by the way, Medicare does cover the
Yeah,
cost of hospice, so it was no cost to us, which was a relief, for
course.
Dad's pocket. But Medicare decides who qualifies and who doesn't. And so an assessment needs to take place, and the hospice people come out. They have a nurse that comes and assesses him, and based on the symptoms and how sick he was at the time, he had stopped eating. And we just couldn't get him to eat. And his appetite has always been voracious. He's always been a great eater. But he had stopped eating. And so that was not good, and he was fading very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so before he went on hospice, I took him to the hospital, and all they did was give him fluids because he was very dehydrated, and sent us home. And after that, the nurse talked to us about hospice. And so we had to learn that this was not and I don't mean to sound harsh, but a death sentence. It was actually just the opposite. It was, let's take care of your dad. We know that there are certain things we cannot do for him anyway. He would not hold up to any kind of procedures with anesthesia. At some point,
At
even
that age, huh?
right,
Yeah.
and especially because of the dementia. Anesthesia is incredibly detrimental to people with dementia.
Okay.
Sometimes they don't come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just a whole host of complications that could happen. So therefore, if he can't have surgeries and he can't have invasive testing, then whatever is happening within his body, we just have to let happen and keep him comfortable. So what they explained was that, someone would be there with him to come in and visit with him 5 to 6 days a week. And in addition to that, and that's an aide who bathes him and helps him either with eating, if he needs to be fed, or just day-to-day activities, helping him get dressed. And his case nurse was coming in twice a week at least to check on him medically as well. So he was getting far better care, and being looked at, getting more attention.
Additional care.
care. Not
Yeah.
yes.
And at no cost.
Correct.
Right, no extra
Medicare.
cost.
Yeah. No,
Medicare, yes.
Medicare covered it. Medicare covered it. So the only caveat is that Medicare has to approve it, and that once you sign on for hospice, then you can't just go to the hospital. You're either on hospice or you're not on hospice.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so I asked, that really triggered us to
Yeah.
ask a
There were-
number of probing questions.
There were two things that kind of go against the grain with that,
Right.
of your way of thinking.
Exactly. Like, should something go wrong again, because with being on hospice care, because we did approve it, ultimately, we were able to get my father eating again. And then he rallied. He regained his strength, and he was no longer bedridden, and he kind of recaptured that zest for life that he
How
has.
long ago did this happen?
October of
Oc-
2018,
yeah.
just last 6 months ago.
Yeah, my gosh.
And so he really rallied. And so when that happens and he gets better, what they do is they take him off hospice because now he's okay, right, to continue on his own without the additional care. And the hospice providers are so kind and so happy to educate. You know, and it includes a whole variety of people. There was the chaplain who came in and sat and talked with Dad and with me and visited. He brought his guitar and he sang for my dad, and oh man, that brought him a lot of joy. I just, you know, I sat back and watched and just had the tears streaming down my face.
Is hospice care universal in the Western world?
I think it's available to just about anyone on Medicare.
Well, I don't.
I don't know.
The Western world, I don't know, but the U.S. Yeah.
The U.S. for sure.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting to know is that there's so many hospice organizations to choose from. There are large organizations like the major hospitals have hospice care within. There are private hospice care organizations. There are more than you can count. There's so many to choose from. And the beauty of where Dad lives, the assisted living, is that they helped us to choose an organization by bringing in two that they work with regularly and they felt were good candidates for us to choose from, and they allowed us to interview them. And the hospice organizations, yeah, very comprehensive. And they come in and they let you ask all the questions you need to ask, and they give you brochures to read, and they educate you so that when you make that decision, it's a very educated decision, and you know what you're doing.
The people involved then do have they have special techniques, special abilities to deal with you, the survivors, with the two of you, and
Yes.
what's going on with you, huh?
Yeah, there's a medical social worker who came in and worked with us and helped us to get through that transition of dealing with really facing the reality of having a parent who is approaching end of life, because that was tough.
And we had to
Very
get
tough.
educated on what end of life really means. There are
Yes.
some very specific physiological things that occur in a person's body towards end of life, and some of them were counter to what our thinking was. One of them is we thought the best thing for him when he got dehydrated was to take him to the hospital and get
Fluids,
fluids.
yeah, IV fluids.
And they
yeah.
explained to us that isn't necessarily as humane as you would think, because it could cause some other problems during end of life.
Right. When the vital organs begin to shut down,
Mm-hmm.
and the liver and the kidney starts to slow, and you start adding fluids, what it actually does is complicate the situation and make it worse. And it can cause a great deal of pain. A year ago, in April this month, my father had a heart attack. He has bounced back from so many. He's got 9 lives, I swear.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not have a DNR for him.
Mm-hmm.
This speaks to a situation we went through.
Say what DNR is again.
Oh, a DNR is a do not resuscitate
Yes.
contract, so to speak.
Yeah.
We had filled out medical directives several years ago.
Yeah.
And we had those on file, and at that time, you know, my father, who has a very strong survival instinct and loves life and wants to live, always said to me, please never give up on me. So we did not have a DNR. We didn't know what goes into, especially with a very elderly person, how traumatic resuscitation can be. And so when my father had his heart attack and we were in the hospital, the doctor there said to me, "You need to get a DNR on file for your father." And again, I thought this was the most horrible thing you could say to a member of the family of this loved one. How can you ask me to do that? My father doesn't want me to give up on him. If something happens and he can be brought back, he wants that chance. And I argued and I argued, and the doctor said, "No, what you don't understand is that in the case of someone like your father who has osteoporosis, so his bones are very brittle and weak, and he's very frail now, that CPR could actually crack his ribs, and you could do so much damage that he'd end up in the ICU in far more pain and maybe never recover anyway than if you did nothing." It was far more detrimental to try and bring him back.
What a learning curve to learn all those
Holy
things.
my
cow.
gosh, yeah.
So that when Rick, talks about going against everything that you believe to be true or right, and to have to say, "No, I really have to let you go." It took a long time to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, we had to think
Many
about
tears.
that, discuss that quite a bit. Yeah.
Yes.
And understand academically what they were
That
telling
we were
us.
actually being kinder
Yeah.
in signing the DNR. And of course, it was something I could not share with my father because he doesn't understand anymore.
Yeah.
And I had to make that decision autonomously. So that was very difficult. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world.
Yeah.
And you were.
I know it's what's best for him, and I've had that reinforced by many doctors, not just that one. So I now trust that's the truth. But still, that thought of having to let someone I love so much.
And a kind of a
Wow.
person who's involved in that system must have some sort of special characteristic where they get a certain appreciation or joy or whatever it is I want to say about helping people like your dad through this period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about kind of a funny thing. What about the animal or the dog, the relationship between like you and the other dog? Is there something special going on there? Spiritual goes beyond just human beings, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Everything's.
What
Yeah.
is spiritual? What does that mean?
I think that's different. That's an individual interpretation for each person. For me, I can tell you what it is. I don't know that it would be the same for you, but it's
Very personal.
connecting,
Yeah.
with a more divine, call it a being or source of love or intelligence, something much, much greater than what we are.
We're talking about what we can experience with our physical being and our thinking, and there's something beyond
Beyond
that.
this,
I think for me it is, I think of, it fits in the categories of feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beyond that, but there is something more. And I'm an agnostic or an atheist or whatever it is now, but I'm not sure. So that's true. However, there is something more, but I don't know what it is.
Right.
And neither do you.
Nope, I don't know. And I probably will never know, at least not till I cross over. But who knows? But, for many, it's nature. It's being out among the trees and feeling free and feeling liberated and just not being closed in, not being overly stimulated by the noise and the day-to-day chaos of technology.
A spiritual experience, I think I've said this before, is that when things are just right, the temperature's right, and everything else that we're aware of as human animals, things are just right, and then I'm available for a spiritual experience. Now, when things are just right, and I'm not sure what time it is when I'm starting into this experience, and I think there's a favorite park in Yellowstone where whenever I go there and just sit there quietly, nobody, I don't want anybody around.
Right.
And next thing you know, I don't know how much time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
It's a timelessness. And suddenly when I think, oh, how long have I been here sitting on this rock? That's when the spell is broken. It's an experience that's hard to describe.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a sensory loss almost. You just blend in with your surroundings, and you lose that sense of time and those linear things that we tend to mark our days by, time and noise and those those things around us that distract us.
There's a depth to you. I forgot my question.
Animals, for me, also provide a spiritual experience.
Yes.
And I can sit down with, my dogs and lose myself that way, because they're so pure, and loving unconditionally.
How about the communication between different species? That's spiritual.
That is spiritual. Yes. I believe it is.
There's a place in England, I guess, where there's a dog, a monument to a dog who accompanied the postman all the time, and for years and years. And then finally, the people who lived in the town decided to build a shelter for this dog because he was always waiting there for the postman to show up. And that goes against all the stories about how the dogs hate letter carriers. Remember that story?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
There's an example of something going on beyond what we're capable of handling in our human existence. Yeah.
Yes, and you see these little videos, especially on Facebook all the time, of animals that should not be friends, a cat and a bird, or right?
Some of those programs are just delightful. Yeah.
And they love each other. They're filled with empathy.
Of course.
They're filled with empathy.
And I have this fantasy that I'm not sure it's true or not, but we have a bird feeder outside of the window right above the sink in the kitchen, and it's a small one. We're feeding smaller birds, and I always talk to them, and my imagination is, do they know I'm thinking about them? And I think they think, I'd like to see some sort of indication that they're letting me know,
Yeah.
But I'm not there yet.
Yeah, sometimes they're bringing the message to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if as much if they know what you and I are thinking, but they definitely bring messages to you.
Well, they read body language. I know with dogs they read body language, and cats do too, and they know tone of voice. They don't. We tend to anthropomorphize them.
Oh yes.
And we dress them up when we call them our children, and we do those things. But I do believe there is a certain telepathic communication.
Telepathic, that's a good word. Yeah.
That can, certainly you wouldn't have therapy dogs if there weren't dogs that are so empathetic that they know when people need them, or dogs that can smell cancer, or dogs that can help with diabetes by telling you when your blood sugar is too low or too high.
There's something else going on beyond our perceptions as human beings that is going on. And we don't go to movies too often because we can't stand the commercials and that kind of stuff. And we just saw a new one this past weekend, Mustang.
Oh, that's on my list. I want to see
It's
that.
and
heard.
Redford was executive producer.
Oh, was he?
Yes, it's really fantastic. Rotten Tomatoes gives it an 83, I think. It's just delightful. So don't miss it.
I want to see that one. We saw Breakthrough,
Yeah.
which was a true story about the boy who lived in Minnesota, I believe, fell through the ice and was under
Like 45
the ice
minutes.
for 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Yeah, and there was no expectation that he would ever survive. And his mother she was deeply religious and wouldn't give up on him when the doctors kept telling her there was, and he did, he completely recovered. You know, you don't have to believe in a God by, the conventional terms.
Miracles still happen.
Miracles happen.
Everything is as a song with me at my age. And I'm particularly curious about this program and what you guys are talking about because I'm 91 this year. And I buried my siblings, 11 of them through the years, and I had no idea about what we're talking about so far. And I've got a selfish interest in learning more about what's going on. And I find in recent years I'm talking more to my wife about how I'm different now as compared to 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And taking it, that's reality.
It is reality. And at some point you do have to think about it. You know, my brother was a government employee all of his career. He worked for the federal government. He's an attorney. And so he does not have Medicare. He has private insurance that the government offers. And as we were going through all of this and he was getting educated, because he flew out here, we thought we were going to lose my father.
Sure.
He flew out here and he met with the hospice people with me. They gave him the whole, spiel, and he came to understand, and he said, maybe I should get on Medicare. So it was something really, it was such a good education. And I think when all is said and done at the end, and I'm sure we're probably running low on time, it's so important for people to educate themselves.
We got a couple of minutes left.
Okay. To educate themselves.
Yeah.
And always better to do it before there's a crisis than in the middle of one, because you're more open and learning is a little more easy, a little less painful. But learn about what's out there, because there can be a quality to end of life. There can be. And I know people experience some horrific endings. But music and comfort and whatever it takes, when you know your loved one and you know what will bring pleasure or at least lessen or distract from discomfort.
Did it bring you two closer together in this period of time since this happened?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so, because we really had to support each other, and there's a lot been going on in a very short period of time.
Well, and the other thing is, my father is the last of our four parents. And everyone else died suddenly. So we never have been through this. And my father is lingering, and it's been 11 years, and the journey through dementia, and it's only in the last year that it's been like one thing after another as he becomes more frail.
Yeah.
And so Rick is my rock. I mean, I couldn't have done this without him. My brother's not here. I have no other family. My girls and my husband have been, I don't know where I'd be without them.
Well, 2 weeks ago, there were two things we were concerned about with him: stopping eating, which happened in October, and breaking his hip, which happened 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's why we couldn't do your show 2 weeks ago about this. And the interesting thing is he broke his hip on the very day that he was supposed to come off hospice. So we had to deal with the rules and
All
the timing.
the protocol, the bureaucracy.
So, and then deal with a whole new set, which was going to the skilled nursing facility and getting him set up
Right.
there so that he could continue. So it's been a scramble, and we've had to hold each other up.
And unless we stop talking, my crew is going to kill me.
I know, I can see him in there. Yeah.
So look at the camera and say something to the viewers out there, anything that comes to mind based on what we talked about, or anything else, and you take about 30 seconds or so. There it is.
Okay,
Oh,
so
that one. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
From my view, I think this is along the lines of become aware, get informed, and then take action, be your own advocate. Because this is a whole, as Caroline described, if you can think about it before, it's not pleasant and it's not something we want to do, and we usually wait till it's crisis. But we're going to provide some websites for information so you can begin to do your own study and research. We are not experts, and anything we've discussed medically or such, we're not experts. We were describing our experience, and we just really encourage you to go out and learn for yourself.
You have taken half of our time away. So go for about a minute or so, okay?
Okay, sure. Don't be afraid to ask questions. By all means, it's part of advocating, but don't be afraid to ask questions. Have a support group, have close friends, family, whomever it is that you trust the most to be able to hold you up when you need help. Don't be ashamed to ask for help and ask questions of the doctors. We got varying answers. Trust in the people who are closest to you. Ask questions and get second opinions from doctors.
Okay, so that's enough. We have just a few seconds left to have a closing message. Oh, I got to thank you for watching. And remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable, as you are now, I can tell. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time, my beautiful viewers.